Sophie thought her job was just to clean floors and polish silver, until one afternoon she opened the wrong door and discovered something that could change or even save her billionaire boss's life. Sophie had been working at the Harrington estate for just 3 months. The house was the size of a hotel, the kind of place most people only see in magazines. But to Sophie, it was simply her workplace. Dust to wipe, dishes to wash, and rooms to tidy. She kept her head down, never asking questions, never crossing boundaries. That's what made her boss, Richard Harrington, the famously cold and distant billionaire, trust her, or at least tolerate her. But lately, Sophie had noticed something strange. Richard had been missing important meetings, speaking in whispers on late-night phone calls, and sometimes disappearing for hours without telling his staff. He'd snap at people for the smallest mistakes, and his usually polished look was starting to fade. Dark circles under his eyes, and an unshaven face. One Thursday afternoon, Sophie was dusting the upstairs hallway when she heard muffled coughing behind a locked door. It wasn't the usual polite, "I've got a tickle in my throat" kind of cough. This was deep, ragged, and desperate. Her first instinct was to ignore it. She was not about to get involved in her boss's personal life. But then, she remembered what her grandmother used to say. Sometimes the people with the most walls around them are the ones crying the loudest for help. She placed her ear closer. "Richard, sir, are you all right?" No answer, just a long, shaky exhale. Something told her she couldn't walk away. She reached for her keys, none of them worked. Then she spotted something strange. The door's lock was old, almost antique, and one of her dusting picks could slide into the latch. With trembling fingers, she nudged it. Click. The door swung open. Inside, the curtains were drawn. The air smelled faintly of medicine, and there, sitting on the floor, hunched over, was Richard Harrington. He looked nothing like the man she knew. His shirt was wrinkled, his hands shook, and his skin was pale, almost gray. On the desk beside him were stacks of unopened letters, bottles of prescription pills, and, most shockingly, a medical report with one word circled in red: terminal. Sophie's stomach dropped. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but Richard's eyes snapped open, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "You weren't supposed to see this." Her mind raced. She realized now why he had been acting so strange. But before she could respond, the sound of footsteps thundered down the hall. A tall woman in a sharp black suit stepped into the doorway. Sophie had never seen her before. The woman's eyes narrowed.
"Get out!" Richard tried to protest, but the woman's voice cut like glass. "If you value your job, you will forget everything you just saw."
Sophie froze. Something in the woman's tone sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just about keeping a secret. This was about protecting a truth someone desperately wanted buried. And as Sophie left the room, her heart pounding, she knew two things for sure. One, Richard Harrington's life was hanging by a thread. Two, if she stayed quiet, she might be signing his death sentence. But what could a househelp possibly do against the people controlling a billionaire's world? Sophie didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying Richard's pale face in her mind, the word terminal circled on that medical report, and the ice-cold glare of the woman in the black suit. She had been a househelp long enough to know when something wasn't right, and nothing about this felt right. The next morning, Sophie quietly asked the other staff if they knew the woman. No one had seen her before. The chef shrugged, the driver swore he'd never met her. The gardener just shook his head and said, "Some people in this house, they like to stay in the shadows." But Sophie noticed something. Every time that woman was around, Richard seemed weaker, quieter, more defeated. And the more Sophie paid attention, the more she realized Richard never actually left the house without her. It was almost as if she was guarding him. One afternoon, Sophie was cleaning the library when she overheard muffled voices behind the door. Woman's voice: "If you sign these documents, your worries are over. No more board meetings, no more stress. I'll handle everything." Richard's voice, shaky: "But this isn't about the company, is it?" The woman didn't answer. The silence said enough. Sophie's pulse quickened. She wasn't supposed to be here. But then the sound of shuffling papers made her peek through the crack in the door. The woman was sliding a thick envelope toward Richard. Sophie's eyes widened. She recognized that envelope. It was the same one she had seen in his locked room, unopened. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for a pen. The next morning, Sophie made a choice. She called someone she never thought she'd speak to, a name she'd only seen in the news. A man who had been Richard's closest friend before they stopped talking years ago. But just as she whispered into the phone, "It's about Richard Harrington. He's in danger," a shadow fell across her doorway. Sophie turned. The woman in the black suit was standing there, smiling. The woman in the black suit stepped into Sophie's small room, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. The woman said, annoyed, "You're making a mistake, Sophie. A very big mistake." Sophie's palms began to sweat. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sophie said shakingly. The woman's smirk deepened. "You think I don't know who you just called? I hear everything in this house. You're a house help, Sophie. You change sheets and scrub floors. That's your lane. Stay in it. Unless you want to lose more than your job." Her words sent a cold wave through Sophie's body, but deep down Sophie knew, if she backed down now, Richard might not have much time left. The woman turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh, and about that phone call, tell your new friend it was just a misunderstanding." The moment she left, Sophie's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst. She grabbed her phone, no signal. Someone had jammed the network inside the estate. The next day, Sophie noticed something terrifying. Richard wasn't just pale, he was struggling to breathe. The woman in the black suit brought him tea, insisting he drink it. He hesitated, but she gave him a look that made him obey. Minutes later, his head drooped and he slumped in his chair. Sophie rushed forward, but the woman blocked her path, saying firmly, "He needs rest, now get back to work." But Sophie caught a glimpse of the teacup, half empty, with a strange powdery residue at the bottom. She knew she didn't have days left to act, maybe not even hours. That night, Sophie crept into Richard's study. She scanned the shelves until her eyes landed on a locked drawer. She'd dusted around it before, but now, with trembling hands, she used the same trick from the upstairs room to open it. Inside was a thick folder marked Private Medical Files. She flipped through page after page until she found the truth. Richard's condition was serious, yes, but not terminal. The only reason his health was worsening was because someone had been slipping unprescribed medication into his drinks, drugs that mimicked the symptoms of a terminal illness. And the prescriptions? They were all signed off by the woman in the black suit. Sophie's chest tightened. This wasn't just about money. This was about controlling when Richard died. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hall. Sophie shoved the folder under her jacket and ducked into the shadows. The woman entered the study, holding a vial of white powder. She walked straight to Richard's tea set and poured it in without hesitation. Sophie's hands shook as she snapped a photo on her phone. This was the evidence she needed, but in her haste, she knocked over a pen holder. The woman spun around, their eyes locked. The woman spoke in a hushed, threatening tone. "You shouldn't have done that." The woman lunged towards Sophie, but adrenaline took over. Sophie darted out of the study, clutching the folder under her jacket. She sprinted through the long marble hallway, her footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. Behind her, the woman's heels clicked faster. "Sophie, stop! You don't know what you're doing," the woman shouted. Sophie burst into the kitchen, where the chef looked up in shock. "She's trying to kill Mr. Harrington," Sophie said, panting. The woman in black entered seconds later, her face perfectly calm. "Don't listen to her, she's delusional," said the woman. The chef froze, unsure who to believe. Sophie realized she had no time to convince him. She bolted for the back door, hopped into her old, dented car, and sped away before anyone could stop her. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as she drove to the only person she could think of, the man she'd called before, Richard's former best friend, Daniel Ross. Daniel opened the door looking wary, but when Sophie shoved the medical files into his hands, his expression hardened. He flipped through the pages, then looked her dead in the eye. "You just saved his life. If we can get to him in time." They raced back to the Harrington estate, By the time they arrived, Richard was slumped in a chair, his breathing shallow. The woman in black stood nearby, arms folded. Daniel stormed in. "Step away from him," Daniel commanded. She smirked. "You have no authority here." But then Sophie stepped forward, holding up her phone. "Maybe not, but the police will be interested in this." She hit play. The video showed the woman pouring the white powder into Richard's tea. For the first time, the woman's face faltered. She took a step back, but the sound of sirens grew louder outside. Hours later, Richard lay in a hospital bed, a soft sunlight spilling into the room. His color had returned, his breathing steadier. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Sophie, sitting by his side. Richard asked weakly, You saved me. Why?" Sophie said tearfully, "Because you're not just my boss, sir. You're a person, and nobody deserves to be treated like their life is disposable." Richard's eyes glistened. "I've spent my whole life building walls around myself. I guess it took someone brave enough to break through them. To save me." 2 days later, Sophie walked alongside Richard as they left the hospital. The summer air felt warm, fresh, like a second chance. As they got close to the car, Mr. Harrington said, "That woman, she's going to face justice for everything she's done, and that's because of you." Sophie smiled faintly. "Sometimes, sir, the truth just needs someone willing to chase it down." Richard's gaze was steady now, full of something Sophie hadn't seen before. Trust. "Looks like I finally found someone worth trusting," Richard said, smiling. Moral of this story: sometimes the smallest voice can make the biggest difference. Never underestimate the power of speaking up, because your courage might just save a life. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story like this. Your next favorite video is just one click away.